Tonight, this video showing another deadly U.S. military strike against a boat allegedly smuggling drugs to the U.S., killing 2 narco-terrorists on board, according to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Across several nights near the border, cartel convoys tried to slip into U.S. waters. Each time, a flash from above ended the run, one explosion after another lighting up the sea.
At least 70 people have been killed in U.S. boat strikes in the region since early September.
By sunrise, the wrecks were gone. No survivors, no arrests, no warning.
That 4 male narco-terrorists aboard this vessel that he shared in this video were killed in this strike. No U.S. forces were harmed in the operation.
Washington called them drone strikes on narco-terrorists. Others called them executions without proof. Who gave the order? How did they even know those boats carried drugs? And how did America's war on drugs suddenly turn into open warfare from the air? Inside America's secret sea strikes on cartels. On January 20th, 2025, the White House made a decision that quietly changed how America could fight its most dangerous drug cartels. A new rule said these groups would no longer be treated simply as criminal gangs, but as foreign terrorist organizations, global enemies of the United States.
They are people traveling on international waters headed towards the United States with hostilities in mind, which includes flooding our country with dangerous, deadly drugs.
That one move gave Washington a whole new playbook. It allowed the government to use powers normally reserved for wars. By February 20th, the government officially named the Sinaloa Cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and several other cross-border groups as foreign terrorist organizations.
President Trump paved the way for military action when his government designated Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations.
From that day, the tone from Washington hardened. What used to be called a war on drugs became, in literal terms, a war on terrorists.
Every one of those boats that gets knocked out is saving 25,000 American lives.
It was more than a change in language. It was a signal that the United States was ready to use force, not just law. 4 weeks later, Mexico's president stepped up to a podium and confirmed what many suspected.
First, because we're not in agreement with any military intervention, she says, adding, it would not solve anything.
American drones were flying over Mexican soil, but with Mexico's permission. She explained that the flights were part of a long-running partnership between both countries, aimed at finding secret drug labs and hidden launch points before shipments left for the north. As summer ended, the story took a sharp turn. On October 2nd, the White House told Congress something no one expected to hear. It said the United States was now in an armed conflict with the same cartels it had labeled earlier in the year. These groups were no longer just drug traffickers, they were now called narco-terrorists. That announcement made it clear. This was no longer a job for the police. It had become a military fight against powerful groups with no borders, no flags, and endless money from drugs and violence. But even with that new war language, there were limits. A senior Pentagon official said the U.S. military had no authority to carry out drone strikes inside Mexico. Any lethal operation had to happen elsewhere, over the ocean or in international zones where no nation could claim the territory. By early September, the new boundaries were tested. A short, grainy video surfaced online, showing a small, fast boat racing through the open sea near Venezuela. A few seconds later, a sudden flash lit up the frame, and the vessel exploded in flames. Officials said 11 people had died, but they released no proof that the boat was carrying drugs. That was the first clear strike of the campaign. By the middle of September, it happened again. Another drone strike, another boat, another burst of light over dark water. The government said the attack took place in international waters and that 3 men were killed, but once again, no proof of drugs was shown. The message from Washington didn't change. This was an effort to stop narco-terrorists before they reached American shores. A few weeks later, in early October, the Defense Secretary announced yet another hit.
We destroyed a drug boat that left Venezuela, operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization, which is what these are.
He said the strike destroyed a vessel near Venezuela that was linked to the designated terrorist groups and claimed it carried enough narcotics to kill tens of thousands. But, like before, there was no evidence of cargo. By late October, the pattern was clear to everyone. There were reports of another drone strike that killed 6 people. By the end of that month, there were dozens of strikes with at least 61 deaths in total. Journalists from multiple networks reviewed the videos and agreed on one point. The United States was destroying boats at sea and calling the dead narco-terrorists.
Comes after a U.S. airstrike took out another alleged drug boat in the Eastern Pacific.
But it wasn't showing any public proof of what was actually on those boats. Then came November. Another clip appeared. Another small vessel. Another burst of flame. CBS News reported that 3 more people had died, bringing the total death toll to about 70. The latest footage showed a boat exploding in international waters, while the Defense Secretary promised that the operations would continue. Still, no evidence of seized cargo. The drone strikes kept coming, but so did the questions. Anger grew across Latin America and inside the United Nations, where officials began to question whether these killings were legal at all. In mid-September, the United Nations issued a warning through its Human Rights Office. It said this new war on narco-terrorists was crossing a line that could not be ignored, that the right to life was being put at risk. In October, UN experts went further, saying the pattern of attacks looked like unlawful killings happening in international waters. By the end of that month, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called the campaign unacceptable and demanded that it stop immediately while an investigation began. Other countries in the region joined the protest. Venezuela condemned the strikes outright, accusing Washington of killing civilians. Families in Trinidad and Tobago told reporters that men from their towns had gone out to sea and never returned. Life along the coastlines has changed in several ways. In fishing villages, skippers who depend on small, fast boats now worry that speed alone could get them killed. Ferry captains say they're stopped more often. In ports from the Caribbean to the Gulf, people talk about more patrol boats, more aircraft overhead, and more nervous questions from authorities. Even those with nothing to hide feel the pressure. The ocean has become a tense, heavily watched space where a wrong move could mean disaster. There's also the question of what gets lost when a strike destroys a target. Once a boat is blown apart, there are no arrests to make, no phones to check, and no crew members to question. The evidence, the kind that leads to real cases, goes down with the wreck. Supporters of the campaign argue that it's worth it, that these public explosions send a message strong enough to scare traffickers and their backers into retreat. But critics say that's short-sighted. Every sunken boat, they argue, erases valuable proof, records of routes, suppliers, and the people behind the money. Without those trails, future cases collapse before they begin. The law adds another layer to the problem. The White House says these strikes are legal because the groups involved are now classified as terrorists.
The move comes after a White House memo sent to Congress saying America is now in a formal armed conflict with the drug cartels.
And under that label, the U.S. military can act in self-defense. But international law doesn't agree so easily. Legal experts point out that drug smuggling, no matter how violent, is still a criminal act, not a declaration of war. The UN Charter allows a country to use force only in self-defense against an armed attack, not as a general policy against suspected traffickers. Those same experts warn that a single mistake, a hit on the wrong boat, could spark a diplomatic crisis with coastal nations. Every attack brought the same questions back again. Were there really drugs on board? Who were those men? If they were smugglers, why not shoot the engines and capture them, as the Coast Guard has done for decades? The government's answer has been that the threat is now too high, that old rules don't apply when terrorists are involved. As this new kind of war unfolds, it's easy to forget how things used to be. Not long ago, America fought traffickers face to face, not from miles away through a camera lens. The job fell to Coast Guard crews following a steady routine. Ships were seized, evidence stacked high on the docks, and every bust came with names, routes, and cargo lists that told the full story. Before the strikes, how the U.S. took down cartel boats.
People don't like taking big loads of drugs in boats anymore. There aren't too many boats that are traveling on the seas by Venezuela. They tend not to want to travel very quickly anymore.
Every patrol began the same way, crews scanning open water for go-fast boats, the long, narrow craft that skimmed the waves carrying drums of fuel and stacks of wrapped bales. When one looked suspicious, the team tried to stop it without killing anyone. It was a step-by-step process that balanced speed with caution. First came the radio calls and flashing lights. If the smugglers ignored those, warning shots splashed in front of the bow. If that still didn't work, a marksman in a helicopter aimed with a heavy rifle and shot out the engines. Once the propellers stopped turning, a boarding team moved in, detained the crew, and checked the bales. The Coast Guard built a specialized air unit just for this job. It's called HITRON, short for Helicopter Interdiction Tactical Squadron. Their pilots and gunners are trained to fire only when the rules allow it and to aim at engines, not people. HITRON shooters use a .50 caliber precision rifle for these disabling shots. The gun is powerful enough to punch through an engine housing from a moving helicopter. The boats they hunt often run hundreds of miles from shore, so finding them depends on coordination. At the center of that web is a command post in Key West, Florida, called Joint Interagency Task Force South. It brings together radar feeds, aircraft patrols, and intelligence from partner nations to pinpoint likely smuggling routes. From there, they direct cutters, Navy destroyers, and aircraft to intercept targets in motion. By August 28, 2025, the command had already helped seize more than 400 metric tons of cocaine, almost 888,000 pounds kept off the water, making it the largest haul on record. And the year wasn't even over yet. To understand how it all works in real life, picture this. On August 11, 2025, the destroyer USS Sampson was patrolling the Eastern Pacific with a small Coast Guard law enforcement detachment on board. These detachments, known as ladettes, ride Navy ships to give them the authority to board and arrest smugglers. That day, lookouts spotted a go-fast boat that fit the pattern. Fuel drums on deck, tarps covering cargo, and a crew that bolted as soon as they were seen. The Sampson launched a helicopter and a small boat to intercept. As the smugglers fled, they began tossing bales into the sea. The helicopter fired warning shots across the bow. When the boat still refused to stop, the marksman used disabling fire to kill the engines. The boarding team moved in, recovered 12 bales that tested positive for cocaine, and detained 2 men. Heavy seas and a damaged hull made the vessel too unsafe to tow, so it was left to sink after the crew was secured. The Navy's report listed the seizure at roughly 1,296 pounds and confirmed that the operation followed international law under a bilateral agreement with Ecuador. The same pattern had shown up on May 29, 2025, when the Coast Guard cutter Thetis offloaded more than 28,500 pounds of cocaine in South Florida. That load came from 4 separate busts in the Eastern Pacific, all made with the help of HITRON helicopters. The value was estimated at over $211 million. These catches weren't limited to cocaine. In February 2022, the cutter James offloaded more than 54,000 pounds of cocaine and nearly 16,000 pounds of marijuana in Port Everglades, worth roughly $1 billion combined. Each bale was documented with a clear chain of custody, so every handoff, from boarding team to lab test to storage facility, could stand up in court. By the summer of 2025, drug busts hit record levels. The Coast Guard launched Operation Pacific Viper, a major push across the Eastern Pacific. In less than a month, crews seized more than 40,000 pounds of cocaine, an average of about 1,600 pounds every day. 14 separate busts led to 36 arrests. Not one case involved a strike or explosion. As the year went on, the pattern held. By early November 2025, the Coast Guard announced it had seized more cocaine that year than at any time in its history, with combined totals from the Pacific and Caribbean reaching hundreds of thousands of pounds. Behind every big bust at sea, there's a mountain of paperwork that most people never see. It's not exciting, but it's what keeps every mission legal. The United States has dozens of quiet deals with other countries, agreements that allow Coast Guard teams to operate inside their waters or board ships flying their flags. These are called bilateral maritime law enforcement agreements. They're the invisible backbone of the drug war at sea. Without them, every arrest could fall apart in court. When a Navy ship carrying a Coast Guard team stops a suspect boat in another country's zone, that piece of paper is the legal bridge. It gives permission to board, arrest the crew, and collect the evidence. Without it, a defense lawyer could argue the stop was illegal and walk the suspects free. The USS Sampson case showed how it works. The Navy's report clearly said the mission followed a bilateral deal with Ecuador. That one line explained everything. It meant the U.S. wasn't acting alone. It was working with Ecuador's approval.
Yeah, Tom, the Trump administration says it provided information and evidence to both Colombia and to Ecuador to show these men were trafficking drugs.
Every step, from the warning shots to the seizure, fit neatly inside the legal framework. Unlike the new practice of blowing up boats, this older approach to fighting cartel drug trafficking produced real intelligence. Arresting smugglers means seizing their phones, maps, GPS devices, and notebooks. Each capture adds another clue: who owns the stash house, who fuels the boats, who pays the crew, and who receives the shipment on the next shore. Bit by bit, these arrests help agents map out entire networks that stretch from jungle labs to U.S. ports. Of course, not every chase ends perfectly. Some smugglers ram patrol boats or flip their own vessels in rough seas. The United States now hunts cartels from the sky, wiping them out with precision drone strikes. But south of the border, the cartels were already fighting back. Their own drones fly lower, hit harder, and cost almost nothing. The rise of the cartel drone war. Cartels have turned drones from toys into tools of war. It began with the kind of small quadcopters anyone could buy online. Simple, store-bought drones with cameras strapped underneath. At first, they just filmed smuggling routes or scouted police checkpoints. Then came homemade rigs that dropped small explosives. But the game changed again when cartels started flying fast FPV drones, racing-style first-person view machines steered with goggles that let the pilot see through the drone's own eyes. Mexican troops and police have raided several hidden workshops where these deadly drones are built. In the town of La Huacana, in Michoacan, soldiers found what looked like a small industrial shop. Inside were computer-controlled mills and lathes used to carve metal parts for drone bombs, 40mm grenade launchers, and even fake military gear. By 2024, these attacks were no longer isolated. Mexico's defense secretary admitted publicly that soldiers had been killed by bomb-dropping drones. Most of the incidents in Michoacan, where the cartel's drone units are strongest. The technology behind them evolved fast. Analysts tracking the trend noticed a clear shift toward FPV rigs, the same kind used by drone racers and soldiers in overseas conflicts. Cheap, fast, and deadly.
FPV means first-person view, which means the pilot's eyes are the drone's eyes. They are remotely controlled with an immersive headset and a radio controller.
These drones could be built for a few $100s. By June 2025, experts were warning that Latin America was not prepared for how quickly these ideas were spreading. Reports described the new designs in detail: handmade frames with shaped charges taped underneath, stronger antennas to fly farther, and simple triggers to release explosives. One report confirmed a major turning point. In April 2025, a cartel carried out its first FPV drone suicide attack. It marked the shift from dropping bombs and escaping to flying straight into the target. It proved the cartels were no longer just copying tactics from wars. They were creating their own style of modern combat. That evolution now reaches the border itself. In July 2025, officials from the Department of Homeland Security briefed the U.S. Senate on something that shocked everyone. In just the last 6 months of 2024, border agents had detected more than 27,000 drones flying within about 1/3 of a mile of the southern border. Officials also described thousands of drone incidents near American airports since 2021. In several cases, aircraft had to dodge mid-air when drones crossed their paths during emergency flights. On October 16, 2025, a drone carrying explosives slammed into the state prosecutor's office in Tijuana.
The Mexican authorities say that a suspected crime group launched a drone packed with nails and metal fragments at the state attorney general's office in Tijuana,
just across the border from San Diego. No one was killed, but the explosion sent a clear message. Drone bombings had reached Mexico's major border cities. They were no longer limited to rural Michoacan or hidden mountains. This new drone strategy matters for the United States even before one crosses the line. Drones give cartels speed, coordination, and surprise. A single pilot can fly ahead of a convoy, spot a checkpoint, and trigger a small blast somewhere else to draw officers away while the shipment slips through a different road. They can patrol river crossings, warn when the banks are clear, or distract police with noise and fire in another direction. Every minute of confusion creates an opening, and through that opening flows what has become America's deadliest import: synthetic drugs. Fentanyl sits at the center of that storm. Even as overall overdose deaths fell in 2024, fentanyl and its chemical relatives remained the leading killers. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed that in 2023, about 7 out of every 10 overdose deaths in the country involved illegally made fentanyl or its cousins. One of those cousins, carfentanil, resurfaced in parts of the supply chain. It is so strong that just a few grains can shut down breathing in seconds. Even tiny changes in how it's mixed can send the death rate soaring.
Carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl.
2 new chemicals have made things worse. The first is xylazine, a tranquilizer made for large animals. Dealers mix it with fentanyl to stretch supplies or to alter the high. Because it isn't an opioid, the overdose reversal drug naloxone doesn't work as well against it, though doctors still recommend using it because fentanyl is almost always present. Xylazine slows breathing and heart rate, and it causes deep, painful skin wounds that heal slowly. The second threat is a class of lab-made opioids called nitazines. They were forgotten chemical formulas from decades ago, now brought back to life by underground chemists.
It's 20 times more powerful than fentanyl. Nitazines are a class of opioids now found in pills and powder sold on the street.
Nitazines can be many times stronger than fentanyl itself. By 2025, medical studies and federal reports were documenting nitazine overdoses across several states. They often appear in counterfeit pain pills that look exactly like legitimate medication. Naloxone can reverse them, but it usually takes several doses. Military labs and forensic teams have confirmed their spread in seized drugs. Then came another unexpected twist. A veterinary sedative called medetomidine began turning up in overdose clusters early in 2025. The CDC investigated a large outbreak tied to the substance in several U.S. cities and warned that more of these non-opioid additives are entering the mix every month. Each new compound changes how overdoses unfold, how quickly they hit, how long they last, and how hard they are to treat. The DEA's seizure numbers showed just how enormous this synthetic market has become. In 2024 alone, agents confiscated more than 60 million fake pills laced with fentanyl and nearly 8,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. That is enough to produce hundreds of millions of potentially fatal doses. The DEA now says about 6 out of every 10 counterfeit pills it tests contain a lethal amount. Every official report points to the same 2 sources in Mexico: the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. These 2 groups dominate the trade, running the labs, the smuggling routes, and the cash flow that keep the network alive. The Sinaloa Cartel, once led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, remains one of the most powerful criminal organizations on earth. Even after El Chapo was sent to prison, his sons, known as Los Chapitos, and his former partner Ismael El Mayo Zambada kept the operation alive. They oversee a network of secret labs hidden in the hills of Sinaloa, Sonora, and Durango. U.S. investigators say these labs can turn chemical shipments from China into fentanyl powder by the ton. From there, the drugs move north through Arizona and California, often inside trucks or hidden compartments of freight trains. In 2025, drug agents in Phoenix and Tucson traced several arrests back to Sinaloa cartel members who were sneaking fake oxycodone pills across the border. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJN, rose from a split with Sinaloa more than a decade ago and has become just as feared. Led by Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, it operates with military precision. CJN controls large areas across Jalisco, Colima, Veracruz, and parts of Baja California. It runs industrial-scale drug labs that turn chemical imports from Asia into fentanyl and methamphetamine. U.S. Treasury sanctions in mid-2025 hit several CJN companies tied to fuel theft and chemical smuggling. Together, the 2 cartels feed America's synthetic drug crisis from opposite sides of Mexico. Sinaloa dominates the northwest, CJN the west and center. Their labs run day and night, pumping out pills and powders that travel north through fishing boats, trucks, and tunnels. Despite record U.S. seizures, their profits keep climbing. Drones now serve as their eyes and shields, helping shipments move faster, safer, and deadlier than before. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.